Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Leslie and welcome to what I like to call Crochet for Icons. And if you're here right now, you're an icon, duh. I just realized that my mic wasn't even on. I don't know why it's flashing though, so I don't know if this is gonna work. You know what, I actually think it's out of battery, so we're ditching the microphone. Okay, so today we're working on a tutorial that is long overdue, so thank you all for your patience. We're gonna be working on a flower sleeve shrug. Okay, so this is the example of one that I worked on recently, and it has slits on the sleeves. It's a straight sleeve shrug, and we have some cute little flowers. You can make this using different types of yarn, so definitely try out different ones than the ones that I suggest. And you can also use different hook sizes depending on the yarn that you're using, so if you try something else out, let me know in the comments. I'm gonna try it on really quickly just so you can see how it looks. Obviously it doesn't go with my outfit today, but that's okay. I forgot to film clips, horizontal clips, so this is gonna be it. Oh god, doesn't all look good with the shirt, but it's okay. Oh, so this is how it looks. Super cute. Oh my god, I'm so excited. I hope you're excited too. We're all gonna be rocking the flower sleeve shrug. So if you're ready to get started on your next iconic crochet project, let's get started. Let's start with our list of materials. You're going to need wafer acrylic yarn for the main part of the shrug, a second color for the center of our flowers, I'm going to be using yellow, and then a third color for our petals, I'm going to be using white for my flowers, a 6.5mm hook, we'll be using this for the entire body of the shrug, a 4.5mm hook, we're going to be using this for our flowers. You can use different hook sizes depending on how big or small you want your flowers to be, a needle to weave in our ends and for sewing our flowers on, and some scissors for cutting. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to be using this light blue yarn and a 6.5mm hook. We're going to be starting with a slip knot, so I'll show you how I do it. I like to wrap my top 3 fingers with the yarn, and then it creates an X, you flip it over and you pull that first line all the way through, and that's your slip knot. And we're going to be chaining multiples of 3 for our foundation chain. And you want to chain enough to reach from one shoulder to the other shoulder, so you want to have this long chain. If you want it to fit oversized, you can make it a bit longer. So keep chaining in multiples of 3, and this just means that your number can be divided by 3. For reference, for mine I chained 66, so keep chaining until you have your desired length. So this is what mine ended up looking like. Then to do our turning chain, you're going to want to chain 5. Then we're going to make our first stitch into the 8th chain away from the hook. So if we count to the 8th chain, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And I like to work into the back bumps, which are right here, but that's optional, you don't have to do it that way. So we're going to double crochet into that 8th chain away from the hook. So yarn over, and then into your hook, I'm doing again the back loop, and you're going to double crochet into that loop. So yarn over and pull up a loop, then yarn over and pull through 2 loops, and yarn over and pull through 2 loops. We have our first square for our mesh stitch. Next, we're going to chain 2, and we're going to be skipping 2 chains from our foundation chain. So we're going to skip those next 2 chains, and then double crochet in the next one. So yarn over and insert your hook into that 3rd chain. Then you yarn over and pull up a loop, then yarn over and pull through 2 loops, and yarn over and pull through 2 loops. And you can see our mesh starting to form, and we're going to continue this exact same pattern until you reach the end of the row. So again, you're going to chain 2, and then you're going to skip the next 2 chains, and you're going to double crochet into the 3rd chain. And if you pull on this a little bit, you can see that it's a little bit stretchy. So continue this pattern until you reach the end of the row, and be very careful not to skip more than the 2 chains or less than the 2 chains. So this is how your first row should look. You should have all these little squares, and I'm just finishing off my last square here. So I'm going to chain 2 and then double crochet in that last chain. Okay, so row 1 is all finished. Now we're going to move on to row 2. So for row 2, we're going to be chaining 5 for our turning chain. After you've chained 5, then you're going to turn your work around. And we're going to continue a similar pattern, so we're going to double crochet in that next double crochet. Just like before, we're skipping those 2 in the middle, and then you do the double crochet. So here we have the first square of our row, and then we're going to continue. So you're going to chain 2, then you're going to skip those 2 chains in the middle, and you're going to do your next double crochet above that double crochet. So yarn over and insert your hook above that double crochet, then yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2 loops, and then yarn over and pull through 2 loops. So we're going to continue this pattern until we reach the end of the row, and I'll show you what to do on that last stitch. So again, you chain 2, and then you're going to skip those 2 chains in the middle, and you're going to double crochet above that next double crochet. So this is how your squares should look. They should be perfectly aligned. I'll show you one more time how to do it in case you need a little extra practice. So you're going to chain 2, then you're going to skip those 2 chains in the middle and do your double crochet above that next double crochet. So I've made it to the end of row 2, and for our final double crochet, we're going to be doing it into the 3rd chain of our chain 5 turning chain. So go ahead and chain 2, and then we're going to do that double crochet into the 3rd chain. So there's 1, 2, 3, go into that 3rd chain, and I like to go through 2 loops just because I think it looks better that way, but you're welcome to do 1 loop instead. So I'm going through that bottom loop, and then I'm also inserting my hook through that top loop, and then I'm just finishing my double crochet. After this, we're basically going to be repeating this exact same pattern for the front part of our top. So I'll walk you through row 3, and then I'll show you how to finish off the rest of the front part. So start by chaining 5. Then you're going to turn your work over. Turn over to start your double crochet. Then you're going to skip those 2 chains in the middle, and you're going to do your double crochet above that next double crochet. So insert your hook and pull up a loop, then yarn over, pull through 2 loops, and yarn over and pull through 2 loops. That creates your first square for this row, and then you're going to chain 2. Then you're going to skip the 2 chains in the middle, then you're going to double crochet above that next double crochet. And that creates your second square, so you're going to continue this chain 2, skip 2 double crochet pattern until you get to the end of the row. And again, we're going to be making our last double crochet in the third chain from our chain 5 turning chain. And it's kind of hard to see the chains from the chain 5, so if you flip it to the back, you can see them more clearly. So we're going to count to the third one. We have 1, 2, 3, and that's the chain that we go into. And again, I'm going through 2 loops, so you see how you can see the top and bottom loop of each chain? I'm going through both of those loops. So through the top loop, and then also through the bottom loop. And again, it's the third chain right there. And that completes row 3, so for the rest of the front part of our shrug, it's going to be the exact same pattern. So decide how long you want your shrug to be from top to bottom, and you're going to continue the pattern until you reach your desired length. For the number of rows, I usually recommend to do between 8 and 13 or more if you want it to be longer. I wouldn't do less than 8 rows because we're going to need space to work on the arm part of our shrug, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to join the front and back pieces along this edge, and then we're going to leave a space at the top for our arm, right? So if we do a small amount of rows, we won't have enough space for our arm. So for example, imagine if I left this exactly how it is with just these 3 rows. If my arm was this big, I wouldn't have enough space, right? Because I would need more rows to fit the armhole. Okay, so this is what I meant. So this is the front, right? You see how the sleeve takes up this much space and then there's still a little bit left over? That's what I mean. So you need to make sure that you have enough space for this sleeve. I'll leave row suggestions for different sizes on the screen and in the description, but of course feel free to try out different number of rows. So continue the pattern until you finish the front part of your shrug, and then I'll show you what to do next. So I decided to do 9 rows, and this is my finished front part of the shrug. Next, we're going to be working on the neck / shoulder part. So we're going to decide how big we want the neck hole to be. I decided to make mine about 4 squares in on each side. If you want a smaller neck hole, you can do more squares, and that will make the neck smaller. If you want a bigger neck hole, you can do less squares, and that will make it bigger and fit a little bit more off the shoulder. We're going to be doing the same number of squares for each side. Again, I'm going to be doing 4 for mine, so let's get started. So I'm going to insert my hook back into that loop. And we're going to start again with our chain 5 for our turning chain, so go ahead and chain 5. Then you're going to turn your work over, and I'm going to continue the same pattern only for those 4 squares. So skip the 2 chains in the middle and then do your double crochet above that next double crochet, and continue for the number of squares that you chose. So here I have my 4 squares finished, and that's going to be the first row for our shoulder. So for row 2 of our shoulder, we're going to do again chain 5 for our turning chain. Then you're going to turn your work over and continue the same pattern in this other direction. I had some extra little threads in mine, so I just cut them a little bit shorter. And then remember, for that last double crochet, we're going to be doing it into the third chain of the chain 5 turning chain. So I'm flipping that turning chain over so that I can see the chains better, and I'm going through the third chain through 2 loops. Okay, so at this point you should have 2 of these shorter rows. And let me just lay this flat so that you can see the shape starting to form of the shrug. Okay, so next we're going to chain 1, and then you're going to leave a longish tail, and that's just going to help us weave in this end later. And you're going to cut. Then you're going to pull your yarn through slowly. Then you're going to put your hook back into that loop, and you're going to pull your yarn through once more. So you're going to pull the yarn all the way through, and then you're going to pull it to tighten it. So that's our first shoulder. Now we're going to be working on the other side, the other shoulder. So you're going to grab your yarn again, and you're going to again start with a slip knot. And leave a longish tail for this as well, because we're going to need to weave it in later. To start the other shoulder, we're going to slip stitch into the third chain of the chain 5 turning chain. So I'm going through 2 loops of that third chain, and then slip stitch. And then just pull that to tighten it. Then we're going to start by chaining 5, and we're doing the same pattern until we match the number of squares on the other side. So go ahead and do your chain 5 turning chain. And I'm going to continue the double crochet chain 2 pattern until I reach 4 squares. Okay, so I have my 4 squares done, and just really quickly make sure that they do match. So I have 4 and 4, they match, so let's move on. So we're going to do row 2 with only those 4 squares. So chain 5 for our turning chain. Then you're going to turn your work and continue the pattern for this second row. Okay, so now you should have 2 rows on one side and 2 rows on the other side. We're going to be doing 1 more row on this side, so chain 5, turn your work and do 1 more row. Okay, so this is how it should look so far. You should have 3 rows on one side and 2 rows on the other side. And to connect the 2 sides, we're going to be chaining from here to here. And we're going to be chaining the same amount of stitches and chains that we have down here. So we're going to count the stitches. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and count all the way down. Every square is worth 3 stitches except for this last square that has 2 chains. Another way of making sure you have the right number is you're going to count each of these squares across, and then you're going to multiply that by 3 and then subtract 1, and that should give you the same amount. And I'll leave the equation up on the screen if you're choosing to do it that way. So let's go ahead and do it for mine just so that I can show you an example. So I'm going to count the squares that I have in the middle. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And if I multiply that by 3, I get 36. Minus 1 is 35. So I would chain 35 for mine. So here I have all of my chains done, and now we're going to connect this to the other side. So I'm going to pick up my other side, and I'm going to be doing a double crochet into the third chain. So 1, 2, 3 right there, and I'm going through 2 loops. So yarn over and then insert your hook into that third chain. Then yarn over and pull up a loop, and then yarn over, pull through 2 loops, and then yarn over and pull through 2 loops. Okay, this is how your neck should look so far, and you're just going to continue the chain 2, skip 2 double crochet pattern until you get to the end of the row. I'm finishing off my last square here, and I did the chain 2, and then I'm just going to do the double crochet above that last double crochet. So we're going to take a quick break just to make sure that the front looks right. So we should have 3 rows on one side for one shoulder, and then 3 rows on the other side for the other shoulder. So if yours looks the same, let's keep going. For the back part of the shrug, we're going to be doing the same pattern, but we're going to be working into the chains that we made for the neck. So chain 5, turn your work, and then continue working until you reach the chains in the middle. So now that we've reached the chains in the middle, I'll show you how to continue this pattern. So to create our next square, you're going to chain 2, and then when you skip 2, you're just going to skip 2 chains from the middle. So here's 1, 2, and then you're going to double crochet into that third chain. Then for the next square, you would skip the next 2 chains, and then you would double crochet in the next one, then skip 2 chains, and then double crochet, and you just keep going. So I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to insert my hook into the third chain away. Here's 1, 2, 3, just insert your hook there. And I'm just going through the top 2 loops and finishing my double crochet. So it should look a bit like this. So I'll show you one more time. We're going to chain 2, and then we're going to skip 2 chains, 1, 2, and then go into that third chain and double crochet. So continue doing this until you reach the other shoulder. So this is how your row should be looking, and if you chained the correct amount, you should have 2 chains left before you reach the other shoulder. So then you're going to chain 2, and you're going to double crochet into that first double crochet of the other shoulder. So then just continue the pattern until the end of the row. After you finish that row, this is how it should look so far. For the rest of the back, it's going to be really easy. We just want to match up the number of rows to the ones that we did on the front. So go ahead and repeat the pattern until you have the same number of rows. So for mine, I did 9 rows on the front, so I'm going to do 8 more rows for the back so that I can match up to the 9. So I finished 9 rows for the back, and this is how it looks. At this point, we want to choose which side we want on the inside and which side we want on the outside of the shrug. It's not super important since it looks pretty much the same on both sides. So for mine, I'm going to leave this side here on the outside of my shrug. Like that's the side that everyone's going to see. So we're going to leave that on the inside because we're going to flip it inside out later. So next, we're going to start working on the sleeves. So I'm going to insert my hook back into my loop for my yarn. We're going to be connecting the front to the back along the side so that we can create our armhole. So we're going to insert our hook into the 3rd chain from the bottom. So start counting from this bottom part of the shrug. So we have 1, 2, 3. Insert your hook into that chain and you're going to slip stitch. Then just pull your slip stitch tightly. After that, we're going to be making 1 chain and you're also going to pull that tight. Then we're going to be single crocheting into both of the squares from the front and the back. And we're going to do 2 single crochets. So insert your hook into both of those squares and do 2 single crochets. This is how it should look, and then if I flip it inside out, it should look like this. Next, we're going to be single crocheting into that next stitch space. For the back, it's a bit hard to see, but the space is right there. So I'm going to insert my hook into that front space, and then also in that back stitch space. And then single crochet. So we're going to repeat this for the next square for the front and the back. So we're going to go into both of those squares and we're going to do 2 single crochets just like we did before. And then again, we're going to be going into that next stitch space for the front and also for the back. So for the back, it's right here. And I'm just going to flip this to the back so I can show you a bit better. The stitch space is right there. So make sure to insert your hook through both of those spaces and single crochet. Now if we turn this to the side, you can see that it starts to form the armhole. So you're going to want to decide how big you want the armhole to be. And you're going to continue single crocheting along the sides, making sure that the squares are aligned with each other until you reach the size that you want for your armhole. And I would recommend putting your arm through it and trying it on just to make sure that it fits as you're joining the sides. And as you're joining the sides with a single crochet, make sure that your last single crochet is above one of these stitch spaces. You don't want your single crochet to be like in the middle of the squares. Once you have your armhole at the right size, we're going to start our sleeve. So you're going to start by chaining 5. And we're going to double crochet into the next stitch space, but we're only going to go into the front and not the back. After we finished our first square, we're going to continue, so chain 2, and then double crochet into the next stitch space, or only the front. And again, chain 2 and double crochet in the next stitch space. And we're going to be continuing this pattern along this front side until you reach the neck. And you're going to stop right before the shoulder. So I've reached the part right below where we made those 3 rows for the shoulder. And we're going to make one more square so that we reach that middle row. So we want to end up on the bottom corner of that middle row. So I'm going to do one more chain 2 and double crochet stitch so that I can make that extra square. Okay, so you see how I have 2 rows left from those 3 rows? This is where you should be, right above that first row and below that middle row. Then we're going to chain 1. And you're going to want to leave a longish tail. This is going to help us weave in our end later. And then you're going to cut your yarn. Then you're going to pull your yarn all the way through. Then you're going to put your hook back into that loop. And then pull the yarn through again. And then just tighten the knot. So we have that joined part. And then we have this front part of the sleeve that ends at that first shoulder row. Now we're going to start with another slip knot and make sure to leave a longish tail for this part so that we can weave it in later. And we're going to be doing a slip stitch into the 3rd chain of our chain 5 that we made for this first row of our sleeve. So 1, 2, 3 in that chain, you can go ahead and slip stitch. And then just pull it to tighten the slip stitch. Now we're going to be working the pattern in the other direction, so start by chaining 2. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to flip to the back side. And we're going to be working in this direction. So this right here is where our next double crochet will go. So remember how before we were only going into the front part of the shrug? Now we're only going to be going into the back part of the shrug. So do your double crochet into that first double crochet of the back side. And I'm just going to straighten this out so that you can better see what I did. So this is the front, and then if I flip to the back you can see where I did my double crochet. You can see that after I finished joining the 2 sides on the bottom, I did my double crochet in that first stitch right after. Okay, let me flip it back around so that we can keep working. So we're going to continue the same pattern and we're going to keep going in this direction. So we chain 2 and then we're going to do our double crochet in that next double crochet stitch. So continue working with that chain 2 and then double crochet in the next double crochet stitch pattern until you reach the shoulder rows. You know how for the front we went up until the first shoulder row? This time we want to go up until the 3rd shoulder row, which is going to be the top one. We want to leave the middle one empty. And I'll show you exactly what I mean in just a second. So for those 3 shoulder rows that we made, we want to stop at this stitch right here, right after that 3rd top row. So this is what it should look like. You should have that middle row open, and you can see that at the bottom we stopped at that first row right here, and then the top we stopped at that 3rd row. We're going to move on to row 2, so we're going to start by chaining 5. Then we're going to turn our work over and then continue the pattern all the way to the other side. And when you get to the very bottom, your double crochet will go into that same 3rd chain that we slip stitched into. So double crochet into that next double crochet space to form your first square for this row. Then chain 2 and double crochet into the next double crochet, and then just continue the pattern until you get to the end of the row. I made it to the bottom and I just wanted to quickly show you where the double crochet goes. It goes right there in the same space where we slip stitched. I made it to the end of the row and our last double crochet will go above that last double crochet. So chain 2 and then do your double crochet. And that is going to complete row 2 of our first sleeve. So you can see that our sleeve is starting to form and we're slowly starting to get our first slit on our sleeve. To continue making our slit longer, we're going to make more rows going from one side to the other side and then back again to the other side. And we're not joining in the middle, we're keeping that space open. We're going to be making each slit about 6 rows long and we're going to have a total of 5 slits. So if you want your sleeves to be shorter, you can choose to do 5 rows for each slit instead, or if you want it to be longer, you could do 7 rows, but keep in mind that there's going to be 5 slits. And we're also going to be adding 3 additional rows after the slits, so keep that in mind as well. I find that 6 rows is usually the perfect amount because after I also steam the shrugs and they do get a little bit longer. If you're going to steam your shrug at the end to loosen the stitches a bit, also keep that in mind. Okay, so go ahead and continue the pattern. You're going to start by chaining 5, then work all the way around, and then make your last double crochet in the 3rd chain of that chain 5. And then again, chain 5, work around, and just repeat until you have a total of 6 rows, or the number of rows that you chose. So here I have my 6 rows, and we'll count them really quickly. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And now we're going to join this last row in the middle. To do that, we're going to slip stitch into the 3rd chain of the chain 5 from the beginning of the row. So find that 3rd chain and slip stitch, and again, I'm going through 2 loops. And you can see that finishes off our first slit. So now we're going to want to flip this sleeve over. And we're going to slip stitch into that last double crochet of the row. So it's going to be at the top of this stitch right here. That stitch there. So slip stitch into that space. And now we can start slit 2. So go ahead and chain 5. And continue the pattern around this direction. So I've reached the end of the row, so I'm chaining 2 for my last square, and then I'm going to double crochet into that same space where we slip stitched to join the row in the middle, right there. So this is how your row should look after our first slit. We're now working on our second slit, and again we're going to continue this pattern with the chain 5 turning chain and then working all the way around to the other side, and then make that last double crochet in the 3rd chain of the chain 5, and then again chain 5 and work around, and you're going to do this for 5 more rows so that we have 6 rows for this slit. And I'll show you again how to join with the slip stitch after you finish all your rows for the second slit. Okay, so here are my 6 rows done for my second slit. So I'll show you again how to join that row in the middle. To join, we're going to be going back to that first square of our row, and we're going to go into the third chain of our chain 5, and you're going to slip stitch. So we have 1, 2, 3, slip stitch into that third chain. And that forms our second slit. Now to start working on slit 3, we're going to flip over the sleeve, and then we're going to slip stitch back into that last double crochet. Now we can start working on slit 3, so start by chaining 5. And then skip those 2 chains in the middle and double crochet in that next double crochet. And you're going to repeat for the same number of rows that you did for slit 1 and slit 2. And then also repeat the same for slit 4 and slit 5. So remember, when you get to the end of the row, you're going to make your last double crochet in that third chain of the chain 5, that same space where we slip stitched in the middle. I'm going to finish my last 3 slits off camera, but please feel free to go back and look at how we did slit 1 and slit 2 if you need some extra help. I'll meet you at the end of slit 5 and I'll show you how to finish off the rest of the sleeve. I'm finishing my last slit here, and I'm just going to join again into the third chain of our chain 5 from the beginning of the row. So you should have a total of 5 slits now, and just make sure that each one of your slits has the same number of rows so that it's even. And just like before, we're going to flip over our sleeve, and we're also going to slip stitch into that last double crochet. We're going to be adding 3 regular rows now without the slit in the middle, so I'll show you how to do that. We're going to start by chaining 5, and it's the same pattern, so we're going to double crochet in that next double crochet. And same as before, you're going to continue the pattern until you reach the end of the row. The only difference with these rows is that we're actually going to join the rows when we get to the end. So I'm making my last square here, and we're going to double crochet in that space where we slip stitch just like before. And then we're going to chain 2 and slip stitch into the third chain of our chain 5 from the beginning of this row. So that's how this row should look, and I'll show you from the other side. So we have our slit, and then you can see that this row is joined here, so it's closed. So we're going to make 2 more of these rows where we join them at the end. So chain 5 to start row 2, and then you're going to turn your work and continue the chain 2 double crochet pattern until you reach the end of the row. I'm at the end of row 2, so I'm going to chain 2 and then join into that third chain of the chain 5. Now we're going to make 1 more row exactly the same, so chain 5 and then turn your work and continue the same pattern. And at the end of the row, you're going to chain 2, and then you're going to join into the third chain of that chain 5. Okay, so now we're going to chain 1, and then you're going to leave a longish tail so that's easy to weave in, and then you're going to cut your yarn, pull your yarn all the way through, Insert your hook back into that loop and pull your yarn through one more time. And then pull it tightly to create a knot. And our first sleeve is finished, yay! But now we have to do the same thing to the other side. So we have our slits here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then you have those 3 rows after that last slit. For sleeve 2, you're going to want to go back and do the same thing that we did for sleeve 1. It's exactly the same pattern. I'll quickly show you how to get started. So you're going to start with a slip knot and leave a longish tail to make it easier to weave in. And we're going to be going into that corner stitch of this front side, and then also into the corner of the back side, so it's going to be the 3rd chain of the chain 5. And then you're going to slip stitch around both of those. Tighten your slip stitch, and then you're going to chain 1 and tighten that as well. Now we're going to join the front and back pieces, and you want to make sure you're crocheting around your 2 ends. To join the front and back, we're going to do 2 single crochets into that first square for both the front and the back. And then we're going to single crochet into that next stitch space for both the front and the back. And remember to keep crocheting around your ends. And continue joining until you have the same size arm opening as you do on the other side. And remember, your first sleeve row, you're going to start with the chain 5 and then work up until that first row of the 3 that we have for the shoulder. And then you're going to cut your yarn, and then you're going to join on the bottom corner, and you're going to end at that top row of the 3 rows. So make your second sleeve, and I'll meet you when you're done. After you're all done with your sleeves, I'm going to show you how we're going to weave in the ends. I'm going to be using a yarn needle for this part. I'm going to start with this end here near the shoulder, and I'm going to thread that end through my yarn needle. And we're going to be weaving in between our chain 2 and double crochet stitches. And you're going to want to weave back and forth between these stitches. I'm going to be going kind of in a straight line here across this edge. So you're going to poke your needle through that first stitch, and then poke it all the way through. And then you'll poke your needle into the next stitch, and then the next stitch. You can do this quicker by putting your needle through all the stitches you want to go through and then pulling it once. I'm just doing each one separately so I can show you exactly how I'm going under these stitches. I decided to leave this part at normal speed instead of speeding it up because I really want you to get the idea of how to do this. I know that sometimes it can be confusing when it comes to weaving in your ends, so hopefully this part is helpful. Once you get to kind of the end here, I'm going to skip that first stitch here and then go under the next stitch, and you're going to work your way back to where you started. So go straight. Once you weaved in your first end, the others go a lot quicker. The reason I leave such long ends when I work on mesh stitch items like this is because I don't want anything falling apart. So I'll leave the long ends and I'll weave them in, especially if you're giving this as a gift or it's going to be used by someone other than yourself. If the end pops out for the person just a little bit, it's not a huge deal since you do have such a long end that we weaved in. Like, think of a scenario where the person is not able to tuck the end back in for whatever reason. They can just cut that little tiny bit that's popping out and it's completely fine. So once you've weaved your end in, you can cut that extra piece off. And it should look like this when you're all done. So now you're going to go through and you're going to do the same for all the other ends. So pick a path to weave in. For this one, you could go straight down this way. You could also go across up here. So weave in a straight path, and then after you reach 3, 4, maybe 5 stitches, you can work your way back to the beginning. Keeping the ends long makes this process a lot easier. You could also go this way for this one. And then for this bottom kind of underarm section of the sleeve, you could weave it back and forth through these stitches right next to it, and then underneath these bottom stitches. So I'll show you with my needle. You would go like underneath these stitches here, so you would weave back and forth to the top and then underneath these ones until you get to the bottom, and then you would skip that first stitch and then work underneath all of those again. For the end of our sleeves, I'll show you a couple paths that you could follow. You can go down this way, across and up, or you could go down and then keep going down, or you could even go across the top. There's a lot of different ways that you could weave all these ends in. So finish weaving your ends and then I'll show you what to do. Okay, so now we're going to flip our shrug inside out. So go ahead and flip it inside out. Next, we're going to be working on the flowers that we're going to be attaching to our sleeve. We're going to be attaching them to this part where we join the slits. So grab your yellow yarn, and we're going to be using a 4.5mm hook. You can use a bigger hook for bigger flowers or a smaller hook for smaller flowers. So we're going to start with the slip knot, and again I'm leaving a longish tail as always. Then you're going to chain 4. And you're going to slip stitch into that first chain. So I'm just going through that top loop and I'm going to slip stitch. So you should have a small circle if you pull this apart. Now we're going to chain 1. And we're going to do 10 single crochets into the center of the circle. And you can crochet around your end as well. And here I'm kind of pulling my stitches closer together to make space for the rest of my single crochets. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then you're going to slip stitch into that first single crochet. Then just tighten your slip stitch a bit, and then you're going to chain 1. We're going to leave a long tail for sewing. This is what we're going to use to sew our flower on. And then you're just going to cut your yarn, then pull the end all the way through, insert your hook back into that loop, and then pull it through again. Then tighten to create a knot. This is going to be the center for our first flower. To make our petals, you're going to take your second yarn color and you're going to make a slip knot. And you're going to slip stitch into that first single crochet. And tighten your slip stitch. We're going to be crocheting around the white end, so that way we don't have to weave it in later. But make sure not to crochet around the long yellow end because again we're using it for sewing. To start our first petal, we're going to chain 2. Then you're going to double crochet into that same first stitch. So yarn over and insert your hook into that same stitch. Pull up a loop. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops, and then yarn over and pull through 2 loops. And then you're going to triple crochet into that same stitch. So yarn over twice, insert your hook back into that same stitch, then you pull up a loop, and then yarn over, pull through 2 loops, and then you yarn over, pull through 2 loops, and then yarn over and pull through 2 loops. Then we're going to triple crochet into that next stitch. Then you're going to double crochet back into that same stitch. Then you're going to chain 2 and slip stitch back into that same stitch. And that's going to complete our first petal. This is how it should look. And again, we've been crocheting around our white end. And as you can see in the back, it's behind all those stitches. So you want to keep crocheting around that end. So let's move on to our second petal. You're going to slip stitch into that next stitch. And then tighten your slip stitch. And we're going to repeat the same pattern from petal 1. So you're going to chain 2. Then you're going to double crochet into that same stitch. Then you're going to triple crochet into that same stitch. Then you're going to triple crochet into the next stitch. Then double crochet into that same stitch. Then you're going to chain 2 and then slip stitch into that same stitch. So this is how our petals should be looking like. To start petal 3, you're going to slip stitch into the next stitch. And you're going to repeat the pattern for the rest of the petals. So we would do chain 2, double crochet, triple in this stitch, and then triple crochet, double, chain 2, slip stitch in the next one. And then you're going to slip stitch in the next one and continue the pattern. So each petal takes up 2 stitches. So we should have 1 petal in these 2, 1 petal in these 2, and then 1 petal in those 2. And then we'll finish it off at the end. I'm on my last petal here and I'm doing my last chain 2, and then I'm slip stitching back into that same stitch. To finish off our flower, we want to slip stitch into that first stitch from the yellow center. And then make sure to tighten your slip stitch. This is how your flower should look. Next, we're going to chain 1. You're going to cut your yarn and we're going to fasten off. So pull that end all the way through, insert your hook back into that loop and pull your end through again. Then just tighten. I'm then just kind of fixing my petals around. Then you're going to take your second white end and thread it through your yarn needle. And we're going to be leaving it underneath the bottom stitches of our petal. So poke underneath the lower part of the stitches. And then weave your end all the way through. Then weave under the lower part of the stitches of the next petal. You can keep weaving underneath some of the other petals. I'm just going to leave mine at the end of this second petal. So now we can go ahead and cut both of our white ends since they both have been weaved. Then we're going to pull on that yellow center end. And then I'm also going to tighten that center a little bit, just so that it's a bit more closed. Then you're going to thread it through your yarn needle. And you're going to make a knot around the stitch right next to this end. I usually do 2 knots, so if you want to do the same, just make another knot into the same stitch. And then I just tighten that knot as best I can. Then we're going to weave this end underneath these yellow stitches. And just weave until you get to the other side. Once you reach the other side, you're going to skip one stitch, the one right next to it, and then you're going to go underneath the next one, and you're going to work your way back to the beginning. Once you made it to the beginning, you can go ahead and cut your yarn. And that completes our flower. Then I just like to fix the petals a little bit. We're going to need a total of 10 flowers, so go back and make 9 more flowers. I'll leave the pattern here for the flower in case you don't want to go back. Remember to leave long tails for each of the center of the flowers so that we can use that for sewing. So finish your other flowers and I'll meet you back to show you how to attach them onto the shrug. So I brought my shrug back and we're ready to attach our flower. I'm going to show you how to attach this first flower to our first slit. So thread your yellow end through your yarn needle, and I'm just positioning it over the joined part of the slit to see where to attach it. We're first going to poke our needle through one of the stitches on the left side. So I'm just poking through these stitches here in that row above that joined part. And then pull your end all the way through. And then I'm going to poke from back to front through some of the stitches of the center. And I'm just straightening my flower. The start of our end should be on that top left corner. Then we're going to poke our needle into the center of our flower. After every time we poke through the center, we're going to be poking into the top of these yellow stitches. So for this first time, we're going to go into this first yellow stitch here, right below that top petal. Then I'm just pulling it a bit tighter so that we don't leave this part loose. Then for this first stitch that we're sewing, we're going to go back into those first stitches that we went through in the start. So I'm poking my needle back through that first stitch. And make sure you're pulling your end all the way through so that we tightly sew it on. Next, we're going to be poking from back to front through the joint part. And we're also going to be poking through the center of the flower. and then we'll poke through above one of the yellow stitches. I'm just picking the next one, and doing it this way kind of helps the sewing blend in with the single crochets from the yellow center. Then we're going through one of the stitches on the right side, so poke through one of the stitches of that row above the joint part, and again pull it tightly. Next, we're going to be poking from back to front through the middle joint part and the center of the flower, but you want to try to keep close to that inner edge of the center. So I'm poking through the joint part and then also through the center of the flower, but I'm keeping my needle really close to that edge. Staying close to that edge is going to keep the center looking neat. Then we're going to go above one of the yellow stitches. I'm just picking this one here. And you're also going to go through one of the stitches of the shrug. So you know how we went through a stitch above the joined part on the right side? Now we're going to go into the stitches right next to the joined part. So we're following kind of these three lines, the top, the side, and then the bottom. Since we're on the second petal, that'll be on the side. So I'm just going to finish pulling my end through that yellow stitch. And then I'm going to insert my needle into a stitch of that second line that I talked about. Then again, keeping close to this inner edge here, we're going to poke from back to front through the joined part and also through the center of the circle. And I'm really trying to keep as close as I can, while also making sure that I am going through the shrug as well. Then I'm going above one of the yellow stitches near the third petal, and then also going through a stitch of the shrug from that bottom line that we talked about. So we're halfway through sewing this first flower on. This is how the back looks. Now we're going to continue sewing around this way. So again, we're going to poke from back to front through that joined center part and then also through the center of the flower. I realized I wasn't going through the shrug, as you can see there, so make sure that you're going through the shrug. And now I'm going to go above the yellow stitch near that next petal, and also through a stitch of the shrug. This is one of the stitches below the center joint part. Then again, from back to front through the center joint part and through the center of the flower, and above one of the yellow stitches near the next petal, and also through one of the stitches next to the center. And we'll go one more time from back to front through the center joined part and also through the center of the flower. And then I'm going above the yellow stitch where that last petal ends, and through that same shrug stitch that we went through in the beginning. And I had this kind of annoying little bump right here that I didn't like the look of, so I just kept going through the center of the flower and then over that stitch just to cover it up. So if you have any parts that are sticking out or look a little bit weird, you can go over them again. After that, I think it looked a lot better. Does it look so cute? Oh my god, I'm excited. Okay, now we have to weave in the end for this, so flip it to the back and create a knot around one of the shrug stitches closest to the center. So I just went underneath this stitch here, and then I pulled all the way through, and then I created my knot. And I usually like to do 2 knots. Then to weave in this end, I like to go underneath the stitches of the petals. So I'm going to poke my needle underneath the lower stitches of the petal, and pull it all the way through. And then I'm just going to keep going underneath the other petals as well. And make sure that you're not able to see this through the front. I'm going to go through one more petal. And then I'm going to skip one stitch from that petal, and I'm going to work my way back to the beginning. So I'm skipping this stitch and then going underneath the next stitch, and then we're going to work back towards the front. Then you can cut off the excess yarn. And then I'm just gonna fix my petals a little bit. And this is how your flowers should look all attached. So now you want to work on attaching the rest of the flowers to your sleeve. Make sure you're working around the center of the flower and also through the shrug. Here's an example of what a finished sleeve looks like. I ran out of yarn for the blue one, so I wasn't able to finish it, but I did want to show you how it looks finished. I did the center for these flowers a little bit tighter. I do recommend that you steam your shrug after you're done with it just to loosen the stitches, but that's completely up to you, of course. Once all the flowers are attached, it's all done. You're ready to make some outfits. I hope you enjoyed making this along with me. If you have any questions, feel free to message me on my crochet Instagram and I'll be happy to help. If you decide to post your finished shrug, please tag me. I'd love to get to see your version. I'll leave all my social media down below in case you want to keep up with me. Oh, and if nobody told you today, you're iconic, duh!